up here with another exciting new deal for you!
Wow.
Want a quick burst of power? Looking to shake things up session by session? Feel empty inside because of the soul-crushing realization that we're nothing but sentient dust in an uncaring void of mostly nothingness that would try to end you at every possible turn? And Cyphers are for you!
I'd buy that for $1.
What are Cyphers? Oh, thank you, me. I'm glad you asked. Really gotta make some friends so I can do these with people. Cyphers are single-use effects that are consumed upon use, and unless a cipher says otherwise, it's limited to affecting the user. What exactly a cipher is can vary from game to game. In a fantasy game, maybe they're potions, scrolls, or magical items. In a sci-fi game, maybe they're alien gizmos, psychic radiation, or hyper-advanced drugs. In a post-apocalyptic game, maybe they're nothing more than pieces of inspiration that keep you going in the barbaric and harsh wasteland known as the Welsh countryside. The specific forms ciphers take aren't as important, it's really more of a flavor thing. Players have a limit to how many ciphers they can have at one time, although there are advanced exceptions to this rule, such as storing manifest ciphers, or allowing too many ciphers with the possibility of consequences, like in Numenera. Ciphers are meant to be used often, and found often, constantly changing up what the character can do to allow them fresh new abilities to tackle scenarios each and every time. Also, ciphers, like most things in this game, have a level. This level is often determined randomly with a number that's in the description of the cipher. The level is useful on ciphers for identifying, using, crafting, etc. Some ciphers also have different effects based on its level. This will be in its description in this case. Cypher effects are often considered either normal or fantastic. Basically, this just makes you think, is the cipher able to be explained as something that could have just happened, or is it some over-the-top crazy effect? Ciphers with normal effects are usually available in almost any type of genre, whereas the fantastic ones may be restricted. Ciphers come in two types, subtle and manifest. Subtle ciphers are those that provide benefits through more abstract concepts, inspiration, blessings of the gods, good fortune, alien psychic residue, sparks of energy, etc. These types of ciphers almost never cause any sort of overt external effect, and are usually something that just boosts the character or provides some effect that could be waved away as just the character going a little extra. Ciphers like these can be extra useful in more grounded games, like a modern campaign, low fantasy, historical, horror, etc. Games where the players aren't teleporting around and shooting laser beams from their eyes. They're just people doing people things. Although subtle ciphers are useful in just about every cipher game you can think of, as a rule of thumb, subtle ciphers should pretty much always be available. Finding subtle ciphers isn't as straightforward as the manifest ciphers that we'll get into in a moment. It's not like you can just pick up an idea from the ground. Or, well, rather, I guess you could in some circumstances. I know Numenera has some pretty weird places to visit. Instead, the GM is likely to just pick certain points in the game where players will refill themselves with subtle ciphers. When this doesn't matter as much as making sure that the players get these times to replenish their internal cache of ciphers. Although players can't just scavenge for these subtle ciphers, depending on the type of cipher game you're playing, they may have other ways to generate them, like going to the local temple and gifting a donation so you may get the blessing of the gods, or an investigative gumshoe group that goes to a classic 1930s speakeasy smoke-filled bar to gain inspiration over a round of drinks. You usually find ciphers in groups of 1 to 6, although obviously this can change depending on the type of game, group size, etc. Interestingly, a player can also force generate subtle ciphers by expending 1 experience point. They can either ask the GM for a general type of cipher, like one that heals, boosts defense, etc. Then the GM picks which cipher you get from that theme and randomly rolls the level. Or you can spend 1 experience point and request a specific subtle cipher at a specific level. However, this time as a player, you need to make an intellect roll with a difficulty of 1 plus the cipher's level. Subtle ciphers can also be replaced with other ciphers if you find a better one. However, the subtle cipher is lost and cannot be given to another character when replaced. You cannot have subtle ciphers past your normal limit either. Also, unlike manifest ciphers, subtle ciphers should generally be immediately identified. You're going to know what they are. Manifest ciphers. These are the ones that are often represented by some sort of external thing. A device, a potion, energy, clothing, the list goes on. Manifest ciphers may have a more dramatic effect, or sometimes even fantastical effect to them than a subtle cipher. Ciphers like these may have to be more carefully given depending on the scenario you're running. If you're running a modern game where there may be only a handful of manifest ciphers that actually work in that game, whereas if you're playing superheroes, then it's unlikely there'd be any restrictions, if at all. Finding manifest ciphers is often a little easier for the GM to figure out and for the players to comprehend in this RPG, because it's as easy as just finding stuff on the ground, maybe items in a chest or salvage from an ancient machine. Players can also actually scavenge for ciphers. This involves a task with a difficulty of usually around 3 or 4, and taking about 15 minutes to an hour. This usually results in about 1 to 6 manifest ciphers found. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on the circumstance. The GM can also restrict where and when players can scavenge for ciphers or adjust the difficulty as needed. Obviously, this is only possible if manifest ciphers are a thing in your game. If you're playing it in, like, say, a modern game using only subtle ciphers, then use the rules we already discussed. You cannot spend experience to force generate manifest ciphers the way you can generate subtle ciphers. They have to be found. Unlike subtle ciphers, you may not always know what a manifest cipher does, although the task difficulty to figure it out is often low, like a 1 or a 2. This, of course, as always, can change and is up to the GM. The process of identifying a manifest cipher is usually just a few minutes. Personally, I only intermittently use the identification requirements for ciphers, but that's because my current group prefers a faster style of play with a lot less downtime activities to discuss. For the games that I run that do have more downtime activities, I definitely use the identification rules or shizzle. Another interesting thing is, you can have a manifest cipher with the effects of a subtle cipher. After all, that subtle cipher that inspires you to have a +1 speed edge could easily have been flavored to be a hypo spray to give you that same edge. There's also an optional mod that allows you to have fantastic ciphers explained in a normal way, reflavoring them to be circumstances of luck, planning, etc. For more information on optional rules and mods, check out my video on mods. Manifest ciphers can also be traded and even stored for later somewhere, although there may be consequences for storing multiple manifest ciphers together, like in the Numenera setting, where things go boom. There's also technically a third type of cipher called a power boost, although these can be considered either subtle or manifest ciphers as well as being power boosts. Power boosts are special ciphers that do not require an action to use. Instead, they are used in conjunction with a character ability to modify or boost that ability in some way. Just like fantastic versus normal effects, not all games may be suitable for power boosts. Are ciphers really that important? Yes! But no. But yes! They are. Technically, you could run a game of Cypher without finding any ciphers. Just like you could technically run a game of Dungeons & Dragons without allowing any sort of feats or magic items or any of the things expected in the game. A few character options in the Cypher system would break without ciphers, but it would technically be playable for the vast majority of character options. Would it be as fun? No, not even close. Ciphers help to curtail a downfall of many other RPGs during long-term play. In a traditional style RPG, you wait to get new abilities till you reach a new stage on your character, like a new level. Something Cypher also has technically, but in a traditional RPG, this means your toolkit for each character is exactly the same session to session until you reach that new stage of that character's evolution. Ciphers give a constant influx of new abilities for players to rely on. This keeps things fresh and exciting from session to session. The player gets the familiarity of playing the same character with mostly the known abilities they've grown comfortable with, but also a revolving door of new abilities to keep things fresh. This is extra good for players with a certain level of character ADD, like myself. In D&D, I'm always coming up with neat character ideas that I am inevitably never going to play because you don't switch out characters that often. As a result, there are a huge amount of abilities I never get to play with. However, with ciphers, I'm constantly getting new toys to tinker with, despite being the same character. This is good game design. Okay, so now that we have ciphers, how do we use identified ciphers? Well, that's extremely easy. Ciphers that only affect yourself almost never require a role of any kind. You just consume the item and follow the description. If the cipher does affect more than one target, then a role is required. Use the stat that makes the most sense for the item. However, if you can't decide what makes sense, then intellect is the default stat to use for tasks with Cypher. Ciphers are a one and done deal. So if you have an ability to use things more than once, unless it specifically states it works with ciphers, it doesn't work with ciphers. You can't trade a manifest cipher once it's been used. So no tradesies to pass around a cool effect. You can use a cipher that hasn't been identified, using an intellect task, usually of the cipher's level. If they fail, that doesn't mean they don't activate it, just that maybe they activated it incorrectly. Do I hear GM intrusion? I think I do. Watch my video on intrusions to see how you could tinker with this situation that way. For random tables for ciphers, as well as forms of manifest ciphers, check out pages 382 to 383 in the Cypher Core Rulebook Revised Edition. The cipher descriptions are listed on the pages immediately following those tables. Well, hopefully you learned what you needed about ciphers. Obviously, this is kind of a big deal in the cipher system. It is named Cypher, after all. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, have a good one.